Now I think I'm live. Why? Why can't it be easy? Oh, yep, there we go. Okay. I'm live on Facebook too. Sorry that the cameras are weird. Weirdness. Hey, it's been a while since I did live office hours. It's been a hot second, as the young folks say. And so here I am. Here we are. My name is Dr. Shannon Kurtz, and I am the creator of voice pedagogy tools and resources primarily for independent voice teachers, but for anybody who teaches voice, really, and coaches. And my pronouns are she, her, or they, them, and I am grateful to live and work here on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, and the Wendat Neo-Wendat peoples. And so welcome to some live office hours. Today, I had a couple of things at the top of my mind to sort of talk about, and I think we had talked about talking about pedagogy principles, and I think specifically I had also thought about talking about the describe what is pedagogy principle, or at least that's what I'm calling it. Instead, because why do what you said you were going to do when you can change it? It's my thing. I can change it. Sorry if you tuned in because you were hoping I was going to talk about the other thing, but I'm talking about this thing now, so Instead, I thought that I might just take, not a whole bunch of time, but a little bit of time to talk a little bit about some of the discoveries and some of my thoughts around pedagogy in general, and then and also what's happening in voice pedagogy, in the voice teaching world, and pedagogy. And part of the reason I wanted to do that is because we're just finishing up two things. So I'm just finishing up the voice ped undegree, which will start again in September. If you're interested in more information about that, just get on my mailing list. So we're just finishing that up. That has been from last September until September 2022 until now, until the end of April. And so we're just finishing that up. The first cohort has come through, some wonderful voice teachers from all over the world, literally. And so there's some lovely sort of wrapping up and discovery and, finalization of learning, and finalization is maybe the wrong word, but some, what have I learned kind of thinking and moments. And I'm also finishing up doing observations or final lessons with the folks in the undergraduate voice pedagogy class that I teach at the University of Toronto. And this year, I reimagined how teaching voice pedagogy could be even in an academic institution when we prioritize learning and learning how to teach, and when the goal is to learn agency as a teacher, and to understand ourselves as teachers, and to have tools to become better teachers, versus the goal being to be a teacher according to the standards that I tell them they should have. So when I prioritized that, and I sort of thought through what is the actual goal in this class, and what do I hope the singers who take this class, what do I hope their teaching trajectory then is once they've taken this class. Once I started thinking through that, then and also having some really lovely conversations with some other like-minded folks, as well as reading some stuff. And that started me on a path of, how can I reimagine? How could I do an undergraduate voice ped class that really supports learning how to teach the actual pedagogy? And so that is closing up right now. We're into the final bit of that. And so that's top of mind, is pedagogy. And along with that, at the same time as those things are sort of closing up and finalizing, and what did we learn and how did we learn, and doing all of the reflection around how do we want to do this next year, next time, what are the things that we can make even more useful and effective, and then what are the things that didn't work as well as we had hoped, how can we change, and what are the things that were super successful, let's keep those in and let's prioritize. And make sure we do them more intentionally. So as we start to do those kinds of reflections, at the same time, so right in the same time frame, all of the advertisements and all of the notices for the summer pedagogy programs and institutes and all of those are coming out now. And so the advertisements are coming out around, there are lots of them now, which is really wonderful. Love that. Love that journey for our industry, having access to so many places to gain understanding about the voice. And when I'm looking at a lot of the descriptions of what you will learn, and I'm looking at the descriptions of the outcomes, learning outcomes. In some cases, and I'm looking at sort of all of the information, and very few of the programs address pedagogy specifically. And what I mean by that is pedagogy in terms of how we teach. What are the actual pedagogy principles? Like, what do we actually do to teach effectively? What are actual educational principles and guidelines, best practices for teaching effectively? And there's lots and lots of information out there, and there's lots of anatomy and physiology and understanding, and certainly if you have a better understanding of how the voice works and how coordinations work, and perhaps how sound works, and perhaps how bodies work, I don't know, whatever. If you've got all of that kind of information, that is wonderful. There's nothing wrong with having that information, of course. But we often just get tied up in that, because having the information does not make you a more effective teacher. Having the information does not make it so that now you know how to parse it out, or that now you know how to communicate that information. Oh, hi, Ms. Jackson-Hearns. Always nice to see you on my feed. Having the information about, formance was the thing. It seems to be, we're moving into sort of transient sound, understanding transient sound, which is terrific. It's all good. We want to understand the information. But there is this kind of equation happening, or this implied equation, that if you know more about X, Y, Z, so if you understand more about function, you will then be a better voice teacher. You will be a more effective voice teacher. And that is a false equation. That is simply not true. It is absolutely not true. So we do not, by acquiring information about how the thing works, we do not actually become better teachers or more effective teachers. What is required to become a more effective teacher is to understand how to teach the actual pedagogy, right? And Liz and I were kind of talking about this a little bit this week as well. So what is required in order for you to be a more effective teacher is, for the most part, not being offered in the majority, from what I can see anyway, the majority of the summer, the summer institutes and the pedagogy institutes and the pedagogy programs. And so again, don't get me wrong, I don't think, I gather information, I teach it, I love it. It's all good. And at the same time, again, there's this false equivalency. There's this kind of lie that creeps in that says that, oh, the reason I'm not as effective at teaching as I would like to be is because I don't have enough anatomy information. I don't understand registration well enough. I don't understand acoustic registration. I don't understand form, or whatever. I don't understand the thing. I don't know how to make vowel shapes. I don't know how to do CCM styles or, popular music styles. I can't belt well. I don't understand how to belt. I don't understand how to use microphone. I don't understand. There's so many things where we assume that are limited, or what we think is a limited understanding of how the voice works or how something about the voice works is the reason that we're not as effective at teaching as we would like to be. And I would like to just put forward this thought. The reason we are not as effective at teaching as we would like to be is because we are not learning how to teach. We're not, yes, and that's the next step, right? Liz is saying we also don't learn how to evaluate our own efficacy as teachers. Exactly. We do not have tools to evaluate whether or not we are actually doing what we want to do. We don't know what it looks like to be an effective teacher necessarily, and what the hallmarks of effective teaching are. And so then we have no way to self-assess whether or not I am an effective teacher, and we have no tools to become a more effective teacher. So we go to the summer institutes, we go get our master's in pedagogy or a doctorate, hi there, and we go and do all of this work. We read the textbooks, we listen to things, we buy the Vocal Instrument 101, we do all of the things, and those are not the things that are going to allow us or support us as we become better teachers or more effective teachers. So this keeps coming home to me over and over and over again. It comes home to me over and over again, especially at this time of year, as I was saying in the beginning, especially this time of year where I am doing intentional self-evaluations. Yes, it gets booped around to colleagues by way of juries or competitions who also may not know how to evaluate the teaching. Exactly. And let me put this other thing out. So we judge the efficacy of our teaching by the outcome of the singers we work with, by what the singers we work with do and how they sing and all that stuff, which is judged externally. We are not assessing whether or not how far a singer has come. We're not assessing whether a singer has learned how to learn. We're not assessing whether or not a singer has learned how to have agency. We're not assessing any of those things. What happens is we assess whether or not a teacher is an effective teacher by whether or not the singers they work with get the Met auditions, whether or not the singers they work with go to the big schools, whether or not the singers they work with happen to sign contracts, whether they get on Disney cruises, whether they do whether they go to Broadway. So and that is all external. That is all external. That is all someone else telling us whether or not we are an effective teacher based on their evaluation of the singers we have worked with. Yes, evaluated by the assessment of the singer's outcome. Yes, the assessment is by anyone but the actual singer or the teacher, right? We give over our self-understanding of who we are as teachers and whether or not we are effective teachers to other people in our industry and to other, to all of the other things, all external. And what does that mean then? That means that we do not have the chance to develop our own tools to understand what it means to be an effective teacher. And we don't get our chance to develop our own agency around How do I become a more effective teacher? What are my goals? How do I understand what effective teaching even is? What are effective teachers actually doing? So this whole sort of like, and as you know, I also firmly believe that we don't become more effective teachers by sort of teaching in a bubble. So much of what helps to make us more effective teachers is by having communication and talking to other teachers. How would you do this? But also with a shared understanding of where I'm actually going as a teacher. So one of the things that becomes eminently clear, that has become eminently clear with the way that I ran the undergraduate teaching project in the voice pedagogy class this year, which was quite different from the way we have done it in the past. So in the past, the singers in the undergraduate voice pedagogy program each taught a student. They taught a set of 8, sometimes 7, depending on the year. They taught a set of 2 to 3 months of lessons. They were, observed by one of the graduate voice pedagogy students or myself, the instructor, and they had sort of 3 check-in points along that teaching journey. Also supported within the class, with the class in terms of understanding how to, effectiveness of teaching. And so we were talking about it in class, and then in those observation moments, so they had an observation and kind of conversation moment around lesson 2, their second lesson, and then at lesson 4 or 5, and then their final lesson. So, yes, Sarah, exactly. I'm going to come back to that as well. Yeah. So we have, so they were observed in several different, like 3 times over, 8 lessons, which is not that much. And they give feedback, certainly, and they were graded according to a rubric, which is a wonderful rubric that I made, which is fantastic. It was a terrific rubric, right? They were graded on like excellent, and also in classes, we were also talking about some of the things on the rubric and how to get better at doing those things, right? And then their final exam or their final teaching, when they taught their final lesson, they were observed and graded according to this grading rubric and how far they had sort of, where I and the teaching mentor, the graduate student, felt they were on this grading rubric, whether they were, a 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 or, whatever and there were, boxes for like what you would need to do in order to achieve a 4 and what you need to do in order to achieve a 3, etc., or a 2 or a 1. And so what this becomes is the same kind of assessment system that is throughout academia, and especially our performance programs, but the same kind of assessment system where your performance, you are graded on your performance and not on your learning. So the performance, the final performance, so that final teaching exam is about how well you are teaching in the moment according to what I think you should be doing. And according to, my lovely grading rubric, and according to what I think you should be doing. Don't get me wrong, I have some pretty good ideas about what it means to be an effective teacher. So, the grading rubric was not bad, but it was also an imposed system, and it was also, it did not take into account what the students wanted as teachers, where they wanted to go as teachers, how well they were actually grasping the concepts, how well they actually understood why they were doing the things they were doing in their teaching, and what they needed to do in order, and whether or not they understood how to self-assess where they were in this grading rubric. So it did not capture any of that information, right? It did not capture anything about their own learning process, about whether or not they understand how to self-assess their own teaching skills. It did not capture anything about what their teaching trajectory would be as they leave the class, because maybe what I saw in that final exam was the peak of what they were able to do, because they didn't actually understand why they were doing anything they were doing. That's possible, right? So they didn't grow. They have no trajectory for growth as a teacher, because that's the final thing that they, that's all they don't understand. So it didn't capture any of that in the assessment, which is typical, right? Our juries are built this way. Our, all of our academia, so much of our academic systems are built this way. The test is, the final test or the exam is an assessment of not necessarily whether you understand the material or whether you have a good understanding of why or how you learned it. And it's not really, often not an assessment of whether or not these are transferable skills, whether I learned a thing that I can now transfer and use in other areas of my life. They're really just an assessment, like a performance, like a jury. It's an assessment of what you're doing right now in this time and how well you're able to perform. So that wasn't what I wanted this year. I didn't want that this year. And so we changed everything up. And the students we created a badging system where, I did the bulk of it, and then I talked to the students about each of the, what they would like to add and what they would like to take away, what felt true for them. And the badging system was a list of, for example, let me just see, I've got a few things here. Demonstrate over describe. So I demonstrated a tonal outcome over describing it. I gave visual cues. I continued to give visual cues. I led with the voice versus always leading on the piano. I used growth language. I solicited feedback or elicited feedback from the singer I was working with. I offered feedback as options. I used find over fix, etc. So I used upstream directives rather than telling them to find new coordinations. I used feedback-based directives. In other words, the singer gave me feedback, and then I said, okay, I would like this, felt like X, Y, Z. Terrific. Let's hear it 4 times now, and tell me which one was the most X, Y, Z. So that's also mindful repetitions. I asked for what I want versus saying, I don't want you to do X, Y, Z. I want you to, right? So I prioritized learning over lecture. So I asked questions versus telling them what was happening, right? I didn't tell them what was happening. Scaffolding. I used scaffolding. So we learned a coordination, and then we used that same coordination in the next exercise, or we put it right into the singing, into the music. I used effective transition. So there were several like that. Demo over describe. Yes! Shut up and demo. Exactly. Oh, Lisa, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Demo over describe. This is like so learn over lecture, demo over describe, explore over explain, a whole bunch of these pithy little ones. So, and what was happening throughout the teaching project then, they were teaching in pairs, and what was happening throughout the teaching project is they were observing each other and basically just like giving check marks whenever they saw their partner doing something like that, one of those things, and also saying, you did this here. And then they were also self-evaluating, where were the missed opportunities, right? Which were the things that I felt that I wanted to do, but I missed the opportunity to do it. And then we just talked about that. So we talked about that at their 2nd lesson. We talked about it at their 4th lesson. We talked about it at their 7th lesson. And then we talked about it at their final lesson. And so the assessments came out of, I tried to be so clear about this, and it's very challenging because these are all really well-trained singers who are in an academic system. They're in 3rd year at least. Some of them are in 4th year. So they've had a lifetime, if you will, of not evaluating their learning, of having their learning evaluated or assessed for them by the instructor. So they've had a lifetime of that in academia. And so what we were doing, I was trying to flip this so that what we were doing is we were talking to the teaching mentor and I were talking to each of the students about how was your learning? How effective do you think you were? How far on this learning trajectory do you think you are for these 3 badges that you have told us already that you would like to prioritize? We did a little bit of suggestions in the beginning, and then they took over after that in terms of what I want to prioritize in my teaching. And then we also then gave them like, okay, here are next steps. I see that you're doing this thing. Terrific. Here's the next step in that trajectory. Or, well, as much as we could, I tried to ask, but we don't always have time. So I would say, like, what do you think the next step is in this trajectory? How can you go further in this teaching principle, in this pedagogy principle? So their assessments, their actual grades, were formative. So based on how successful do I feel I have been at acquiring a skill, and do I understand what I need to do in order to continue on the trajectory that I am on in terms of continuing to get better and better at this skill. So that's what we asked them after each of their observations. What was successful? What was missed opportunities? And what are you going to do to ensure that you are either intentional about being more successful or intentional about not missing the next opportunity? What will that look like? How will you know you're successful? How will you know that you're doing the thing? So, so in our final exam time, our final lesson, when we were doing the discussion, I'm saying to them, and I'm saying this over and over, I almost don't care whether or not you are able to teach successfully in this final lesson, whether you're able to actually show us which skills you've acquired in this final lesson. I almost don't care, because we are not grading you on whether or not you have achieved a level that I think is the right level for you to be at in your teaching on these various aspects. We're not grading you on a rubric. What this final assessment is about is, again, do you feel like you have acquired the tools you need in order to be successful going forward and in order to continue to grow? And also, if you stay on this trajectory, what will your teaching look like? That was a lot of uncomfortable. And also, I asked them to tell me in terms of whether they felt they were good, which is a B, or whether they were excellent, which is an A. And then within the A and within the B, if they said A or B, the teaching mentor and I decided on actual percentages because we had to. But so over and over and over and over and over again, the reflections, sometimes I was almost crying because of the reflections. Sometimes we had to kind of pull it out, because what happens when I ask you, how was your learning? It's like they deflect to. What did they deflect to? Well, the student was really a lot, like I could hear that the register transition was so much more clean, and there's more resonance, and they understood their breathing so much better, and they were able to get like this note that they hadn't been able to get to before. And I'm like, oh, that's not what we're assessing. I know that's what you feel like we should be assessing, is whether or not the student was successful. That's not what we're assessing. What are we assessing? I have to go back over and over. We're assessing how you feel about your learning and about your acquiring the tools you need to stay on this learning trajectory in terms of your teaching. So once we were able to get folks to actually go there, very uncomfortable conversations for some folks. Some folks were like, yeah, right in it, loving it. But lots of folks have never had anyone ask them these questions, right? I don't know that I've had anyone ask those questions specifically for myself. So yes, or as explicitly as we were asking. We were asking really explicitly. Where do you feel you are? And once we were able to kind of drill down and get those questions going and kind of really talk about where they felt they were in their learning, the responses were so incredible. Now, big caveat, obviously I am sitting in the room and I don't know how much freedom any of them would feel to give. I mean, there's still marks riding on this, right? So how much can we have an actual honest conversation? I don't know. Hopefully, I strove to create spaces throughout the whole 9 weeks that we were working together where the students would feel like they were able to be honest and that they were able to ask questions and say, but this doesn't, but I also understand the situation. With that caveat in place. The responses were overwhelmingly, I was so scared to teach, and now I feel like I have the tools. First of all, I feel like I've come so far in my teaching. I'm asking these kinds of questions, which is then, allowing them to have more information about their own process, about the student's process, and then that means that I don't have to do as much work to figure out their own process. So I understand why I'm doing that. I understand that I want to do more of X, Y, Z because that's going to do these things. I understand that I want to make sure that I'm like using this kind of language because that it communicates this and it means that the singer then has more agency. So they're talking about all of these things, and overwhelmingly, over and over again, I didn't think I would be a good teacher. I was scared to teach. I felt so self-conscious. It was really hard. I'm so glad I did this. I feel like I could be a good teacher. How do you know? And then I'm asking those questions. How do you know you could be a good teacher? Why? How do you know you're more confident? What gives you the confidence now? Because I know I have these tools. I've got this badging list. I understand what these mean. I know, right? I almost cried several times. I'm not gonna lie. Still got 2 more assessments to go next week. And I'm not gonna lie, I almost cried. Because I feel like I have tools and I understand why and how to use these tools. And I understand the principles behind them. And I understand the goal, right? So many of them talked about, I understand that I don't have to know as much as I think I have to know, which gets me back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this. I understand, I was so scared because I don't really understand registration yet, right? I don't really understand how to shape for X, Y, Z. I don't fully know blah, blah, blah. And I was pretty scared to do the teaching because I didn't think I knew enough to be, an effective teacher. But now I understand that I actually don't have to know as much as I think I do in order to be an effective teacher, so long as I stay open, so long as I stay curious, and I do want to figure stuff out, of course, but I can be an effective teacher simply by being engaged in the ways and using these pedagogy principles, right? Using the student-led, student-centered, transformational teaching, which is Liz's beautiful way of thinking about the teaching as well, versus transactional teaching. Megan Durham posted today, and I reposted it all over the place, about power with versus power over dynamics, where when I can relinquish the responsibility, when I can relinquish the responsibility to be in charge of their learning, and when I or to be in charge of them getting better, or them and having all of the information they need in order to get better, when I can relinquish that and I can just rest in the knowledge that I actually have good teaching skills, combined with some understanding of the voice, of course. But when I have the good teaching skills, the possibilities are limitless. The possibilities for me to become an effective teacher and to grow into my teaching is limitless. I'm not limited by the fact that I didn't go and do, the summer institute or the summer program, or I didn't, I don't understand transient waveform theory or whatever it's called, I'm not limited by that. I'm not limited by the fact that I maybe don't understand how registration works, or maybe I don't understand, I'm not limited by that. So, if I've been asking these questions too, and also in the VoicePed Undegree, I've been asking these questions of the teachers I'm working with in the VoicePed Undegree. What would it feel like to teach with ease? What would change? What does the most ease look like in your teaching? What would change? Is it really that you now understand how to belt? Is that really what is going to change your teaching so that you can teach with ease and confidence and grounding? Is that really what's going to change your teaching? Is it because you can understand laryngeal positions? Is it because you understand convergent versus divergent vocal tract shaping? Is it because you understand, how to work through tongue tension? Is it because you understand blah, blah, blah? Is that really what is going to be the defining factor for you in terms of being able to teach with ease and all of the ease that you would like to teach with? Keep asking yourself those questions. Is that really the thing? Maybe you already have the information you need in order to teach the singers you already work with. What would it feel like to know that you already have everything you need, all of the information you need, all of the anatomy and physiology, all of the acoustics, all of the science informed knowledge you already need in order to effectively teach the singers you're already working with? What would that feel like? What would that look like? I'm curious about that. If you're curious about more pedagogy, I'll tell you what. So I'm going to be doing a couple of things over the summer. One, I'm going to be offering some VIP days, which are days where we work together, where we work together for a 4-hour chunk, and we work on teaching. So we talk about some of these pedagogic principles. We talk about what you want to have change in your teaching, what your teaching will look like when you are on the trajectory, what you need to be on the trajectory toward your most ease-filled teaching, most confident teaching. What will it look like when you can assess your own teaching? When you don't have to assess the efficacy of your teaching by whether or not your students are singing in Canadian Idol. Is that even still a thing? I don't think it's still a thing. Whether or not they're singing in whatever. Whether or not they got into the arts show. Whether the arts program at the high school. Whether or not they are recording artists. Whether or not they are... and I'm talking very specifically to independent voice teachers right now, right? I'm talking so specifically to a typical independent voice studio teacher. What would it look like if you can assess your teaching and understanding of the efficacy of your teaching, not by how many of your students made it into the arts school, not by how many of your students got gold in the festival, not by how many of your students got the highest mark in the RCM exams, but because you know that you are on your own best path to wonderful teaching. What would that feel like? What would that look like? If you're interested in that. Sorry, I squirreled there a little bit because I'm so passionate about this. It gets me so riled up when we have like a, you know what? It doesn't make me angry right now. Sometimes it does. Right now I'm not angry. I'm exhausted and sad. I'm so exhausted and so sad by the implicit promise that you will be a better teacher if you come and do this pedagogy course where we will teach you more about anatomy and physiology. I'm exhausted by that. I'm saddened by it. It makes me so sad. I think I'm crying right now. That is a false promise. Am I saying that you may not be, again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these things are not great. I'm not saying it's not great to understand more about the anatomy, physiology, the voice, acoustics, science. I'm not saying it's not great to understand what I'm listening to be a wonderful diagnostician. Like that is, to have great ears, as they say. But I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? Yeah, thank you, Liz. I'm not saying that's a bad thing in any way, shape, or form when I'm saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that I'm so exhausted and saddened, again, by that implicit promise of you being a more effective teacher, a more effective pedagogue, understanding how to teach better and having better ways of understanding your own teaching that comes along with the certification that is from some of these institutions. I'm saddened by that. And exhausted. Right. So if you're interested in doing some pedagogy work, in working through some of the ways that you can learn to self-assess, understand how teaching works, understand how to be a more effective teacher, and also in becoming, as the students have been saying this whole week, in being able to say, oh, hey, I actually do have everything I need right now. What would that feel like? If you're interested in exploring that, like I said, I'm going to be doing some VIP days. I'm also going to open up my schedule a little bit for some one-on-one, just a little bit. I'm considering doing a 10-week training, mini training in the summer. We'll see if that comes through. And then, of course, the voice ped undergrad begins again in September. So information about that will be coming out very soon. As soon as I can just get through. I just need to get through undergraduate. You're so welcome, Sarah. Yeah. And Sarah, I think you had a comment earlier that was also that I loved, right? You're identifying a problem with the field of education and pedagogy more broadly. Yes, this is even beyond music or voice. Education is a newer field, and classroom teacher training in Bachelor of Ed programs doesn't really necessarily teach how to teach. I know. I think it's getting better, Sarah. I think there's more coming through with, newer teachers. I think there's more. I think it's getting better. And also, as I've said multiple times, one of the things that I think our educational system, at least here in Canada, does well, or at least is in place for teachers, is that they do practicums. So one way to learn how to teach well, even if you're still being graded on a rubric, is to actually teach for someone else, right? So it's still not my favorite, but at least there's that. Anywho, keep your ears peeled, eyes peeled, whatever that saying is, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if we can't get a little bit more of that voice ped revolution on the books. What would it feel like to know that you have everything you need already? What would that feel like for the singers that you were working with? Okay. Have a good weekend. Let me know if you answer that question. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, take good care. See ya. Let's end.